Hi, everyone. Welcome to the seventh session of the Global Finance Conclave being organized by the Jindal School of Banking and Finance. I'm Shohini, and I'm joined today by Mr. Suyash Rai, who is a fellow and deputy director at Carnegie India. Suyash works in the political economy of economic reforms and the performance of public institutions in India. In the past, he has worked for NIPFP and ICICI Bank. He has also been a consultant with the Ministry of Finance and with the consultative group to assist the poor CGAP of the World Bank. His writings regularly appear in many publications, including the IMF Working Paper Series, the ADB Working Paper Series, Wall Street Journal, and so on and so forth. Today, he's here to share his latest draft paper and a presentation on reforming the resolution framework for financial firms in India, which is also the title of this session, where we are discussing the future of bank resolution and bank insolvency laws. With that, I hand it over to you, Suyash. Thank you so much for joining us. And Suyash, we have about 20 minutes for your presentation. Perhaps you can start.
Thank you, Shoni. Thank you, and to your school for inviting me today. This is a policy paper. Let me just start with this clarification. It talks about a few policy ideas. It analyzes a certain kind of problem and offers certain solutions as far as policy is concerned. And the narrative will flow from certain problems to certain kind of responses to the problems and what needs to be done going forward. So to begin with, let me refresh our memories about some experiences with financial firm failures in recent years in India. I mean, these are not very old memories. All of them are in the last 3 years mostly. But just to quickly recap, there was a big high-profile failure of the IL&FS group in 2018. The most interesting thing about it was so sudden that just a few months earlier, it had the group holding company had reported very good capital adequacy, almost 33%, well above what the RBI requires, and its ratings of the holding company and the subsidiaries, most of the subsidiaries are very good. AAA, many of them, AA plus, some of them. And suddenly, between August and September, the group failed, and in October, it went into resolution. And the resolution was basically an ad hoc method. It was done through a committee chaired by a senior banker. And even 3 years later, the resolution is still ongoing. And it may take a couple of more years, if not longer, to actually complete the resolution. Then in 2019, IDBI Bank, which had been in trouble for a very long time, it had been running very high NPAs, and no resolution method was found feasible, and ultimately LIC and central government had to bail it out. They together put about 9,000 crore rupees into the bank to bail it out. Another shocking failure, and probably the biggest private bank failure in India's history, was the Yes Bank failure. At that time, Yes Bank had about 2% of total deposits in India. Just to give you in comparison, Global Trust Bank had only about 0.5% of its deposits when it had failed. And Yes Bank also, although the bank again had been in trouble for a while, the reported numbers, audited numbers, didn't look so bad. So even until September 30th, 2019, it was reporting the tier one capital of about 8.7%. And suddenly, by December, it had fallen to 2.6%. The bank had failed. And in March 2020, it was sent into moratorium. Again, the resolution method was a bit ad hoc. It was basically bailed out by a consortium of banks. It was led by SBI. Then Lakshmi Vilas Bank failure also happened around that time. But this was an exception because it was done, the resolution was done in a manner which is considered to be a good practice in many other countries where they have advanced, well-developed, effective resolution practices. And it was done by sale to another private bank, and there was a process through which a bid was received and an agreement was reached that the bank would be sold. Another example is the PMC Bank, which is a multi-state cooperative bank that also went into resolution. Basically, it may get liquidated, but they're working on a resolution right now. It's been now 2 years and it's still ongoing. So these are just examples to get started and refresh the memory. But there are a few themes that emerged from a review of financial firm failures in India, especially bank failures. One is that there's often a delayed identification or recognition of failure. So sometimes they have failed to identify that the firm is failing, or sometimes they actually identify but they don't recognize it. So they exercise forbearance and they delay the recognition of failure. And this is something that has been seen for many examples. Some examples I just gave, but Global Trust Bank and other, there are many examples of delayed recognition of failure. And by the time the bank or the financial firm, NBFC, goes into resolution, it already has lost a lot of value. Second is that the methods of resolution are often very ad hoc, and mostly they involve some kind of bailout by government, direct or indirect. What do I mean by indirect bailout? It's that the government owns many banks, obviously. India still has a public sector dominated banking system, and often the failures are managed by merging the failed private bank with the public sector bank. So I have reviewed all the bank mergers that have happened since nationalization happened, and 23 out of the 26 mandatory bank mergers, this is the forced mergers, which is a resolution tool, were done by merging the bank with the public sector bank. Only 3 out of the 26 actually were mergers with private sector bank, and where there is a presumption there was a voluntary kind of sale that happened and the private bank bought it to resolve the bank. Then another issue is the reliance on public funds. So obviously, when it comes to public sector banks and regional rural banks, recapitalization is the preferred mode of dealing with failure, or when a bank gets close to failure. And or they just merge with a larger bank, which is also in effect functionally like recapitalization, because that larger bank will have to be recapitalized for the purposes of absorbing the losses of a smaller bank which is in trouble. Then for consumers, especially if you are a consumer of a small bank, cooperative bank especially, then sometimes it can take a lot of time to recover whatever money that you can recover out of a failed bank. So although the deposit insurance is paid out usually in a year and a half, 2 years, which is also a long time, it's not a short time, the remaining recovery can take up to a decade or sometimes even longer. There are case studies that I've cited in my paper where bank took decades to actually be liquidated. So to cut a long story short, when a financial firm fails in India, if it's large enough to threaten financial stability, then the stability is maintained primarily by direct or indirect government support, bailout, not by a quick and orderly and timely resolution of the failed financial firm. And if it's a smaller firm and their financial stability is not the primary concern, only consumer protection is concerned, again, to the extent that the consumer protection is achieved, the funds are protected, it is done through direct or indirect government support, bailout, direct or indirect, rather than a timely recognition of failure and orderly resolution. So that's been the experience, I would argue, of financial firm failures in India. And it's one part of it is just delayed recognition of failure, and that has got to do with the way regulation in India is done. And I'm just taking here the example of banking regulation. Now there is an emerging body of work on the regulatory forbearance in banking in India, which we saw after the global financial crisis, where there was a larger economic crisis and the banking regulator, namely the Reserve Bank of India, didn't recognize the problems in a timely manner. It exercised certain number of forbearance, which gave the banks the ability to pick and choose when to recognize that a loan has gone bad and the true asset quality be revealed. And that gave them the opportunity to arbitrage the system and created a bigger crisis going forward. So Anusha Chari and co-authors have argued in a recent paper that this led to a misallocation problem where more and more loans went to low solvency firms at the cost of healthier firms. And because you didn't have to recognize the true quality of assets, there was an incentive created to do this misallocation. The other researchers have argued that this actually led to a vicious cycle of sorts where, because you had this forbearance going on, banks could tunnel the capital, move it out through dividends. That was actually freed up. I mean, the profit that was created by the forbearance itself. And this, perpetuated a cycle which eventually led to more forbearance going forward. Back in 2017, my colleagues Rajeshri Singh Gupta and a co-author had argued that this forbearance that was exercised actually led to a delayed resolution and created more and more problems of its own. So it's a tendency that is seen most clearly in the last decade or so. but it's a long-standing tendency of Indian financial regulation, especially in banking, that we delay recognition till we must recognize, and by that time, a lot of value is destroyed, and resolution becomes basically a like burying the dead. There's not much left to be done with it, and it's part of it has got to do with this fact that the regulator is also the resolution authority. The regulator has no independent division. Also, just the same authority that is giving the license, doing the regulation, also has to decide when to close the bank or to resolve it, and it just creates incentive in which the regulator has a strong incentive to keep delaying till it is 100% certain that there is no way back, because it makes the regulator look very bad when a bank fails and has to go into liquidation or into resolution. And it's so if you look at the extent the legal framework, if you look at private banks, the RBI is the one that makes the resolution scheme, and it has to take a central government's approval, and it has only a couple of instruments, merger and amalgamation, that can be used for resolution. Public sector banks, obviously, the central government is the prime mover there. It consults with RBI, but it can decide how to deal with a failed public sector bank. So on and so forth. So the powers are primarily with the regulator, and in the cases of government-owned banks, with government. And regulator delays. I mean, first is exercise forbearance in a crisis, then the bad loans pile up, the asset quality gets worse, and it tries to do prompt corrective action till it can, and then often it is late in actually acknowledging that not much can be done, and we need to stop these schemes of restructuring and forbearance and corrective action actually send into resolution. So there is a cycle that goes from starting with regulatory forbearance to delayed recognition of failure, and then delayed resolution. So now if I contrast this system with how some of the best systems of resolution in other countries work, there are a few key things that stand out to me, and the details are in the paper in terms of what are the key features. One is that as a firm, like a bank, starts getting into trouble, even though the regulator is focused on correcting and trying to recover the firm, recover the bank, get it back to good health, resolution authority, it may be an independent authority or a division in a central bank, or in some cases even the regulator has a separate division, starts focusing on trying to resolve the failing firm. It assumes that the recovery may not work out, the corrective action may not work out. We need to prepare and work towards resolution. So that's something that is a separate function. It is considered to be a separate independent function in the best jurisdiction, and it's taken seriously as a corrective action. And when corrective action fails, you take orderly kind of resolution action. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but there is at least a recognition there's a separate function. Second is that if it's a complex institution or a large conglomerate, they take preventive action in advance to improve resolvability of the conglomerate or the complex institution. So if there are some features of the firm that can make it very difficult to resolve it, they have the power to make it more resolvable. Third is that there's a clearly defined trigger for when a bank, for example, will go into resolution. It's a very clearly defined trigger. For example, if you look at the US in the FDIC, there are stages, and there's a stage very clearly defined in quantitative terms when the bank has to be sent into resolution. This is not there in India right now. It is very much subjective about when the RBI decides. Although internally they say they have a trigger, it is not something that is there in a law or stated in public in clear terms. Another good feature of the most effective resolution regime is that they do early resolution. So when a bank is failing, they don't wait for net worth to go net worth to go negative. They actually resolve it just before that, so that there is some value, and a orderly resolution, which mostly involves merging with another willing buyer of the bank, is actually feasible. So there are these, the features which you see in effective resolution frameworks, and they make the system a little more certain. So you see, not because government is standing behind to bail out a institution, because you have an orderly resolution system, you see relatively less uncertainty for depositors. So you see fewer runs on the bank when a crisis hits in a bank. So even if there's a rumor that a bank may fail, some faith has been created that this institution has worked. And of course, the frontier here is the FDIC in the US, but there are others also who are working towards this kind of a gold standard. And One more point just before I move on is that there's a variety of instruments for resolution that they use. It's not just one or two instruments of the kind that we have given to regulators here. They have a suite of instruments from which they can choose based on the requirement of a particular institution, which particular method of resolution they will use. Now, comparing in a more specific way our regime with other regimes, there's a Financial Stability Board which was established at G20's behest after the global financial crisis, and it does an annual review of resolution practices in its member countries. And what it's reported in 2020 that India is one of the only two countries out of the 24 that they look at which have not implemented any of the what they consider to be key attributes of effective or good resolution regimes for financial institutions for banks. So they have different regimes for banks and insurance companies. Today's talk is focused on banks, so I'm going to talk about banks. And India and Saudi Arabia are only two of the 24 countries which have not implemented even one of the key attributes. And what are the kind of key gaps? So one, of course, is as I said earlier, is the institutional architecture. There is no independent resolution authority or even a independent division in the central bank or regulator for dealing with resolution actions. Resolution powers are fragmented across various regulators and central government. And if there's a conglomerate, then it makes it very difficult to resolve it because they all have to coordinate together to come to an agreement for the resolution plan. And this is very different from what you see in other countries. So this is just a review of some of the countries. The majority of the countries in at least the G20 framework have an independent resolution authority, not part of the regulator or a central bank. Some of them, 6 of them, have central banks, separate divisions under central bank which do the resolution work. 2 countries only, Australia and Switzerland, have financial regulators doing resolution, but they have created a separate division or a subsidiary to do it. It's not considered to be a part of the main regulatory function. And 2 other countries have different mixed approaches. Japan, for example, the regulator determines the resolution action and the Deposit Insurance Corporation Authority that implements it. And Russia has a different model. So the general trend, if I can say so, is to move towards either independent resolution authorities or independent divisions under central banks or in some cases financial regulators for resolution. So resolution is being recognized as a specialized separate function from regulation. It needs to be seen as the other side of the regulatory framework, which is not focused so much on recovery and prompt corrective action, but more towards resolution and closure. Similarly, we see that compared to other countries, we in India, as I discussed earlier, there's not enough planning and effort to improve resolvability. So when an IL&FS fails, I was shocked to read at that time, I was doing a case study on it at that time, that the RBI didn't even know how many subsidiaries the conglomerate has, how many companies the conglomerate has, how many JVs it has. And it took a few weeks for the committee to actually come out with a statement that how many are there. So it was a very complex conglomerate. It was primarily a financial sector conglomerate, but the regulator didn't have enough legibility about what the conglomerate had inside it. Then there's no clear trigger for resolution, at least not as far as we know in public. And many of the powers for resolution are not given in the laws here, which basically bind the hands, even of the regulator who wants to do resolution sincerely. It doesn't have the powers to do many of the things that you see in other countries. So now, I talked about some of the problems in our framework, compared the current Indian framework with other countries. But why is this an important problem? Why should we focus on it? There are many problems, why focus on solving this problem? So I think in India, there is a case we made for prioritizing this kind of reform. So one is that we have a large number of public sector financial firms. Some of them work better than others. But when a public sector financial firm fails, whether it's a bank or insurance company or other, the only alternative today only option the government has is to bail it out or to merge with some other public sector firm. So if you have a resolution framework, at least you will have an option to resolve the firm by other methods. So, for example, merging it with a private firm, sending it to administration and so on. cutting into different pieces, selling some to private firms, and maybe sending some to liquidation. Those options will be created if you have a well-functioning resolution framework. Second is that even when it comes to private firms, often you see a direct or indirect bailout by government. That will hopefully become less common if you have an effective resolution framework for reasons that I discussed earlier. Then, going forward, if regulators want to try more disruptive models and accept more disruptive models, give more licenses, you see more failures, right? Old business models will die, old firms will die. We are told fintech is going to disrupt old finance. If within the existing firms also more licenses to be given, some firms will fail, right? Because that's the way markets work. And if you have an effective resolution regime, then these things can be done. Regulators will become a little more little less risk averse. They'll continue to be risk averse, less risk averse, in this sense that they will not see every license as as much of a risk as they see today. Because they will hopefully be, I mean, they'll be more, hopeful that the resolution authority will take care of failure when it happens, and their reputation will not be destroyed by the failure. If a new business model comes and old business models are disrupted, the disruption will be handled in a more, orderly manner than it would be in the current scheme of things. And if you have a separate resolution authority or a separate resolution function, it creates an incentive for the regulator to do timely recognition of failure, because there is a resolution authority which can step in and resolve the institution, and the regulator need not try till the last moment to try to recover the firm, because it knows that it can go into an orderly resolution regime and it can hand it over and it becomes the resolution authority's problem. It is no longer the regulator's problem. So the time at which they decide to go into the resolution may be preponed a little because of this. And finally, the tendency for regulatory forbearance and delayed recognition, all of that is also a kind of public choice problem, that because there is no check on the regulatory discretion, there is no counter to the regulator's decision. This continues for as long as the regulator wants it. But if you have another authority which is looking at the same firm, which has the power to take action on the same firm, you will have a little more accountability for the regulator against things like regulatory forbearance. So these kind of problems have been recognized in the past by various committees and commissions of the government. Back in 2013, FSLRC had recommended a reform of resolution framework. In 2014, a working group of ministry and RBI recommended a similar reform. A task force was established for building a resolution corporation in India, again in 2014. 2015 budget, there was an announcement by the finance minister to prioritize this reform. In 2017, the cabinet approved the bill. The bill had many of the features that I discussed just now, to create a framework for monitoring of financial firms, planning of resolution, taking preparatory action for resolution, and then actually doing the resolution using one of the instruments of resolution that exist. And it had a multi-stage process, as I discussed earlier, that from a healthy firm to a failed firm, there has to be a multi-stage process in which at some point regulator hands over to the resolution authority and says, go and resolve this firm, it has failed. It had these features, but it was withdrawn in July 2018. This is the FRDI bill, it used to be called. And when the bill was being withdrawn, the finance minister stated 3 apprehensions that had been raised about it to withdraw the bill. And it was an election year. It was less than a year before the election was to happen. So I think they got cold feet and they withdrew the bill. So the 3 apprehensions were: one around the bail-in instrument that was there in the bill. Bail-in is the opposite of bailout. When you put money from outside, that's called bail-in, and bail-out. And bail-in is if the losses are absorbed internally. So some of the claims are written down because because the institution is being basically recapitalized from within. Second issue was the deposit insurance cover. At that time, there was only 1 lakh rupees per person per bank cover, and demand was made to revise it. And third was that this was applicable on public sector banks. In fact, it was by design. It was a feature, not a bug, something other than capitalization if a sector financial firm fails. But the bill was withdrawn, and since then, basically, they have been trying some patchwork reforms because it's an important reform. Most other countries that we compare ourselves with have already done these reforms. And especially after the global financial crisis, it's become a high priority reform in many countries. But our political economy didn't allow it to go through at the time. Politically, it wasn't considered to be feasible to push it through. So they've been trying patchwork reforms. So as you may have noticed, in 2019, the RBI Act was amended to give RBI more powers over failing NBFCs. This was in wake of the IL&FS crisis. 2019, some of the NBFCs, systemically important NBFCs, were covered by IBC for, for the purpose of resolution. 2020, the Banking Regulation Act was amended to give the RBI certain powers for resolving failed cooperative banks and so forth. But these are patchworks, as I mentioned in the slide. There's no, nothing comparable to what is required as far as a comprehensive reform for resolution is considered. Now we are in a crisis. We are in a major economic crisis, and real economy is in a lot of trouble. Although the recovery is underway, many firms are likely to fail, and eventually, as we know, real economy crisis does transmit to financial system and financial firms, especially. It may happen with a lag, but it will happen eventually. And we may see a few more financial firm failures. We're already seeing quite a few in the last few years. So we need to prepare for eventualities. And we need to have a framework which is modern and which is capable of dealing with financial firm failures. And in fact, the RBI governor last year recognized this problem that we have a big gap in our system and we need to address it. So, in my view, a new law is required, a new agency has to be built to do it. But these things take time, and I'm not fetishizing a law. I'm not saying that setting up a law will solve the problem. It's a first step towards, getting towards an effective resolution framework. I've studied the US experience in detail, and it took them decades to actually build up FDIC for all the reputation that it has for doing orderly resolutions of banks. So, on the three issues that the honorable minister, had mentioned for FRDI withdrawal, one of them has already been addressed. So, the deposit insurance cap has been raised from 1 lakh to 5 lakh. So, now it fully covers 98.3% of deposits in Indian banks. So, only 1.7% of deposits have the depositors have money which is more than 5 lakh rupees in one bank. Then on bail-in powers, I think there are possibilities of some compromise or modified version. So you can have only contractual bail-in where the counterparty, investors are already signed off and knows that this instrument is bail-inable. And the power to cancel or write off liability, you can just limit it to common equity. That's it. So, that's something which usually happens anyway in a failed financial institution, that the equity holders have to absorb the losses. That's the role of equity anyway. And on inclusion of public sector banks, my view is that should be possible to push it through, but you need to make a compromise which is consistent with the kind of demands that they were making. That they were worried that an independent resolution authority will be able to take a public sector bank into resolution. That shouldn't be the case. So you can say either mandatory consultation or approval of the government for resolution action. So that's something which may work. I'm not saying it will, but it may work because it addresses some of the concerns. So if you want to go down this road, if the government wants to do it, there are some of these design ideas. There are many more in the paper, but some of the key the issues I've addressed in the previous slide. But it's not just, it's very difficult to build an agency, right? And we are in a crisis. We don't know what kind of challenges will come up. So I'm arguing that to begin with, the resolution power should be given to the regulators itself. So it's not a first best solution, but under the circumstances, it will be an improvement, because even though it's not ideal to have resolution with the regulators, at least they will have more powers when they do take a form into resolution. Then by the law, you establish a resolution corporation, which will take over these powers in the next couple of years or so, 2-3 years. And that can be done through notification of government. But having this complete gap in our resolution framework right now is a very big risk, because especially in the present crisis, but even once we are out of these woods, there will still be a sense that we have a big gap in our regulatory architecture. So that's the summary of the paper.
Thanks so much, Suyash. Maybe we can stop sharing the screen. Suyash, we have about 5-7 minutes. I just wanted to sort of get in some of what is happening today in the country and try and get your perspective on that. One is that with respect to the early warning triggers that you spoke about in the paper, we know that we don't have a very evolved system, say, as compared to FDIC. But given that we have the PCA framework, which kind of is operating on some similar lines, and given that the RBI has just come out with a new PCA framework, do you think the PCA framework, in the absence of an absolute law, can be tweaked a little bit in the meanwhile to counter for some of these risks?
The PCA framework only is basically a regulatory framework. So it is its primary focus is to, ensure recovery of the institution back to good health. So if you cross some of the thresholds, then prompt corrective actions are taken. You're given certain targets to achieve with respect to fundraising, improving quality of lending, reducing the rate of credit growth, and so on. So it's already there, and it's been, recently revised and reformed to some extent, but it doesn't solve the main problem that I'm talking about. One is the problem of regulatory incentive to delay and to forbear. That's one. The other is the problem of the lack of instruments for resolution, lack of resolution powers, which, even if the RBI was to reform its prompt corrective action even further, it would not have the legal powers to do the kind of things that are required to be done in the resolution. So, for example, the power to create a good bank and a bad bank, and to send a bad bank into liquidation and a good bank be sold to another bank. So those kind of powers, to the power to transfer critical functions into a kind of a bridge institution, which is an important power as far as financial stability is concerned. The power to deal with financial market infrastructure institutions. In fact, our clearing corporations and all don't have any resolution framework right now. So the big problems will not be solved in any meaningful way, I think, even if you have a more modern prompt corrective action framework.
Okay, and the second question I want to ask you was on the political economy of creating a resolution corporation in India, as you said, as FSLRC and multiple other committees have spoken about. Given the checkered history and the now evolving history of relationship between the regulator, the banking regulator, and the government, and I'm talking about the last, 5-7 years or so. Do you think creating a resolution authority in the next, say, couple of years is possible, realistically speaking? And B, even if it is possible, we want a healthy tension between the resolution authority and the government, and that's a good thing. Do you think that tension will exist in the, given what is, given the relationship, the history of relationship that we're seeing now?
So I think on the first question, the ball is in the government's court, because the Reserve Bank of India has gone out of its way to say that it supports this, and it didn't have to. Like last July, when Governor Shaktikant Das made a statement that this is a priority that should be pursued, it's a big gap. He didn't have to do that, but he said it because he sees the problem that RBI has limitations. It cannot actually do many of the resolution actions. It's a problem that needs to be solved. And other regulators have also been on record supporting some kind of a resolution reform. They have not gone to specifics about what they agree and don't agree with, but they have. So I think the political economy problem is very much in whether the government can address the kind of concerns that led to the withdrawal of that bill in 2018. And those I've addressed in the slideshow briefly, and there are more ideas, more detailed ideas. It is already been some time since the 5 lakh rupees decision was taken, and now a few cooperative banks have already benefited from that. So, and once you have that experience and there is some goodwill that is built around it, then it becomes over two issues: dealing with public sector bank unions and dealing with the depositors' anxiety over bail-in. So both are addressable. So, for example, if you have contractual bail-in, it will by definition not apply to depositors. So if you have that kind of a modified version as it is in some countries, then you will in one step basically assuage the anxiety of many of the depositors. You're very powerful bodies, because there are a large number of people who rely on deposits, FTs and all for their retirement income and all. The other is, although, to be more precise, the bill was not designed in a manner that depositors would be billed in. So It's a misconception, but okay, you have to acknowledge reality as it is in terms of political economy. The other is the application of public sector institutions. I think there has been a shift in the last 3 years because this was withdrawn in 2018, and since then a few things have changed. First, government has said it wants to privatize some of the public sector financial firms, including insurance and banking firms. It has privatized Air India. It has expressed its intent to privatize more firms. There is a certain shift in the government's mood that obviously that doesn't mean that it's going to privatize all the financial firms, but it is willing to take on that battle because much more than the FRDI bill and the application of resolution to public sector financial firms, it was the privatization decision that was much more, difficult for unions to accept. And it is, they're still fighting it, but the government has shown some intent to fight that. So I would argue that if it's willing to fight that battle, it's already gone 2 steps in that direction. One more step it might be able to do, but it'll have to make some modifications so that it's not a all-out war. There has to be, like in public sector banks privatization, they said a couple of smaller ones might be privatized, but that's it. They're not going beyond that. Here also, if you have a modification of the bill which says that the government approval will be mandatory before any resolution action is taken on a public sector financial firm, it could work.
Okay, thank you so much, Suyash. I obviously have a plethora of other questions. There's so many things to discuss, but perhaps we can get you back, in the future for an entirely new conversation on resolution of cooperative banks, which is another area we haven't touched.